understand what is available from an administration and programmability surface support. One thing I didn't mention is, just sort of briefly, is we do have new views that are available just for SQL Azure. And as we get into some of the demos and specifics of migrating, we'll see some of them. One that I think I don't have mentioned that I always like to share with customers is we do have some views that help your DBAs to monitor how much physical space is actually being used. So you can almost think of it like, you know, how you would monitor an electricity bill. Your DBA can use this view to monitor the actual physical space used so that they can help to accurately forecast how much using SQL Azure will cost. And then we talked about collation behavior. Okay, so once you get through all those sort of considerations about compatibility and connectivity, then you need to get to the actual nitty-gritty of doing the database migration. So you need to think about if you're going to move the schema, move the data, move the schema and data, and then another consideration that I actually didn't put on the slide is policies or security implementation. So at the core level, of course, that's logins, but you might have some other security policies or preferences that you wish to migrate, and we'll address schema, data, and policies for both SQL Server and non-SQL Server as we progress along. So as I said, we'll look at SQL Server, MySQL, Access, and then talk about other relational databases. So one of the great things about working with SQL Azure is, even though it's a relatively young product, we've done, I think, a really good job integrating it with our existing tools and actually rapidly releasing some new tools. I think our tooling story is really differentiates us from all competition, and one of the pieces of advice I'd give to you when you're considering implementing is try to make maximum use of our tools and try to really find out which tools are available. So hopefully this webcast will help you with that. So as you can see here, and I'm going to be showing you almost all of these as we go along, we've got something called the Migration Wizard, which is from CodePlex, our open source platform. We have the Migration Assistant for Access or MySQL. We have the Import-Export Wizard from Management Studio. We have the Generate Script Wizard from Management Studio. We have a new capability, Create Database. This is a new T-SQL command for SQL Azure alone. We have already support integrated with integration services. You can use good old BCP or bulk copy protocol. And then we have some CTPs or betas around data sync and OData. And we actually have a new one that I haven't listed here where we have an import-export tool, which is a little bit different than the import-export wizard. So we have 3 betas for tools. We're really trying to give our customers tools so that they can click to configure as much of this migration as is possible so they can rapidly get up to the cloud. All right, so probably the majority of the people listening are going to be going from SQL Server to SQL Azure. So let's take that case on first. So generally, if you're going from SQL Server to SQL Azure, you can have a choice of GUI tools and or command line tools. So we're going to get into demos here in just a minute, but just so you know what you have to pick from. Management Studio has, as I said, the Generate Script Wizard and the Import-Export Wizard. One little sort of nuance of this is you must be using SQL Server Management Studio 2008 R2. So you need that edition and version to have the SQL Azure compliant tools. SQL Server Integration Studio, again, you must be using R2. Of course, you would be using Business Intelligence Development Studio to create your SSIS package if you create it from scratch rather than saving it from the Import-Export Wizard, and I'll show you both here. And then we have the third-party tool right now, the SQL Azure Migration Wizard. From the command line world, we have just good old scripting. We have BCP, we have Copy Database, we have the Import-Export Wizard, and the Import-Export tool. So lots of good stuff. So we need to get into some demos here. So let's talk about the Generate Script Wizard, and then well, actually I'm going to show it to you first so you can see what I'm looking at. So let me share out my desktop, and let me go to Management Studio. Now, if you've not seen this before, I have both an on-premise SQL Server And I have also a cloud SQL Server, and this cloud instance is actually a 30-day trial instance. So I encourage you, if you've not signed up, there are some links at the end. If you have an MSDN subscription, you can have actually a longer access, so you should probably do that for your first trial account. But if you don't have an MSDN subscription or you don't feel like messing with it, and particularly you don't want to give a credit card for any charges that might be incurred above the free amounts, then we have a 30-day offer. So here I've connected, and the way you connect, of course, is you just click Connect on Database Engine, and then you would just connect just as you do. Note it's R2, and note you have SQL Server authentication. So inside of here, if I wanted to generate a script, let's say for the DDL, I could just go in, and I've got a real simple database here, and right-click it, and then I could say Tasks, and Script Database As, and I'll say Generate Scripts, and it gives me a wizard, of course. And this is all familiar to us, and we'll say the whole database. And now when we click on Advanced, if we go A to Z so we can find this more easily, and then click down to Script for the server version, you'll see it's set for R2, but this is sort of the tricky part, if you will, Script for the database engine type. You click the drop-down here to set this for SQL Azure Database. What will happen is the DDL script that's generated for you to create the tables, views, so on and so forth, will generate a script that is compliant with SQL Azure. And so let me show you how this works. I say OK, and I'm going to say Save to a new query window so we can see what it looks like, and say Next, and say Next, and it's generating. Now, as I said, you'll see some of the things that I talked about in terms of compatibility. Of course, we only have a single database, so we won't have the use statement to change databases. That's not necessary. But one thing I'll just call out here. So in Create Table, let's find, I have a table called Question, okay? So I've got Table, and notice that here I do not have the sort of typical on for a file group, because we are not designating which file group, which of course ties to an underlying physical position, because we don't have to do that in SQL Azure. So the on keyword is not part of the object generation. So one of the nice things about the script generation capability inside of Management Studio R2 is if you set it for the target edition of SQL Azure, you don't really have to worry about which T-SQL is supported and which isn't, because it'll only generate the script that is supported. So that's a nice way to start. And of course, then you could execute the script by going over to your instance and then creating a database. Now, notice if I right-click here, I do have the ability to create a database. Now, I'll tell you that if I create this database, it will actually fail, because on the trial version, you're only allowed to have 2 databases along with master. So if I go inside of here and I do the really lazy way and I say specify values and I say, what day is it? I'll say Tuesday test. It's going to actually fail because it'll tell me that I've exceeded the limit, okay? So, and there it is. It would exceed the quota of the server. And you'll note that when I right-clicked here, I did not get a GUI. So if I right-click on the on-premise and I say New Database, of course I'm going to get the big GUI dialog box. So you'll see that our tooling is very similar, but not yet identical, because tooling is newer for SQL Azure. It's great that we have the compatibility, but we get the T-SQL rather than the GUI dialog boxes at this point. Now, I anticipate that will change in the future, but that's what we get. So anyway, so if I then switch to this database, if it were created, then I would simply run the script inside of it, and I would have the objects. Now, that's one way to do a migration, and for some situations you might want to do that because you might want that fine-grained level of control. Although I think that a lot of you are going to just want something very quick when you first start. So we're going to move kind of towards that as we get back to the slides. So as I said, the Generate Script Wizard is something that you can use, and I pretty much went over all the pros. The cons for you to be aware of using the Generate Script Wizard is you have insert statements instead of raw data, and then you have a fixed row batch size. Okay, of course, you can edit that, and you're going to, just as a tip, want to set no count to on to increase efficiency. So, that's a tool that some of you might choose to use. Now, if you for some reason just wanted to generate a script, you could remove all the various aspects that were not supported manually if you needed that level of control. And again, I've got references to it, but just to go over some of the things. You can't have a use to switch databases. You can't have an on-primary. You can't have extended properties. You can't have not for replication. You can't have certain index options. You can't have Windows logins. You can't have unsupported XML features. You can't have new sequential ID. You can't have encrypted stored procedures. One that I have actually run into in migrations is you cannot have heap tables, not allowed, and you can't have user-defined types. So there I actually just showed you that. If you'd rather, or it's okay in your scenario to just not have to deal with manually removing things, you just set the database engine type to SQL Azure. Now, the next tool that I'm going to show you is the SQL Azure Migration Wizard. So this is available at sqlazuremw.codeplex.com and was actually written by one of the members of the team. So I'm going to fire this thing up here, and let me just start this up and run it. And what this thing does is, let me just make this small so you don't have to see all this other stuff, is it allows you to either analyze a particular SQL database. So if you have a really complex situation and you want to not just generate a script, but you want to see like where the compatibility problems might be, or the one I use a lot is Analyze and Migrate, because that will not only use the SQL Azure option to generate the compliant DDL script, but it'll also generate the BCP, just really quick-like. If you were kind of crazy, you could do Migrate without analyzing, or run it. And notice also you can use the profiler traits file. So this is a free tool. You just say next, and then you connect to whatever is local. So I'm going to connect, and I need to see what is the name here. I don't remember. Let me bring this up, put it in the background, and then call it Express R2, and then I'm just going to use integrated security and get a list of databases, and then I'll pick this little small dating game, and then I'll say next. And this is doing the same thing. Now notice I have, as I just demoed, but the difference here is it's generating it faster. I'm going slower, but obviously if you were in a hurry, you could just click, 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 and if you wanted the default, this could actually be a less than like 3-4 minute operation to migrate a database and the data. So this tool is one that I use very, very frequently to do quick demos.